Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's my great pleasure to introduce today Gergely Csibra for a series of 2 talks. He's, as some, I think all of you know, is a world-leading psychologist, developmental psychologist, well known for a lot of things, including his work on natural pedagogy. He was a professor in London, also in Budapest, and is now in Vienna. Actually, it's the Budapest job that moved to Vienna at CU. He was awarded the Jean-Nicolas Prize not so long ago, together with Gergely. And he also benefited from a number of distinctions. I'm not going to list them, especially as I don't want to take much time, because we have only 1 hour in total. But let me simply say that he was awarded 2 or maybe more ERC grants, and that what he's going to talk about today is actually, I mean, the title is the same more or less as that of this one of his ERCs, so maybe he's going to present the results of that investigation. So, Gergely, it's your turn.
Thank you. All right, can you hear me well? Okay. So, in 2007, paper appeared in the journal Nature, the title Social Evaluation of Preverbal Infants. And it reported a study that went like this. Infants were habituated to this kind of events. So they see this red circle trying to climb up a hill, not succeeding, and then another agent is coming and pushing her down. So this was the hindering event. And then also the other type of events, and again the red circles trying to climb up the hill, and then another agent is coming and pushing her up, and that's a helping event. And so when infants have seen this many, many times, then afterwards they were given these 2 objects, offered them, asking them, who do you like? And then they could choose one of them. And what they reported that most 10-month-old infants and all of the 6-month-old infants reached for the character who played the helper in the previous slides. So this is how the study was interpreted by the researchers. They said that humans engage in social evaluation far earlier in development than previously thought, and the capacity to evaluate individuals on the basis of their social interactions is universal and unlearned. The social evaluations we have observed in our young subjects did not stem from infants' own experience with the actors involved, but were made on the basis of witnessed interactions between unknown individuals. The infant is rendering a judgment about the value of a social act. The ability to judge differentially those who perform positive and negative social acts may form an essential basis for any system that will eventually contain more abstract concepts of right and wrong. And that the capacity to evaluate individuals by their social actions may serve as a foundation for developing a system of moral cognition. So this interpretation of this study implies lots of common assumptions that researchers in early social cognition adopt, either explicitly or more likely implicitly. Let me just list some of them. They assume that infants can see geometric characters as goal-directed agents, that they understand that social interactions may yield positive or negative outcomes to the participants, that they conceive these positive or negative outcomes as the goal states that the observed agents try to achieve, that is like helping or hindering, that they interpret these outcomes as having objectively positive or negative value, not just for the patient, but generally, that they think that these goals and actions arise from trait-like attributes of the agents. They are prosocial or antisocial by nature, which would allow infants to predict that such agents would act with similar goals towards any patient, including the infants themselves. And on the basis of this, they choose their own partners from them. right? They choose the prosocial, the helping one. So that's the underlying interpretation here. So today I'm going to argue that most of these assumptions are wrong. At least they are not supported by empirical data. Maybe the first two are correct. So that will be the main argument, but it's not just a negative argument I'm going to make. I'm going to offer an alternative, and the alternative is that what infants do in these observations, when they observe interactions among others, they don't infer underlying traits that would explain these interactions, but they infer underlying relations between these social agents. So then let's starting with the positive sides, with the first 2 points. First, we have to argue that infants can actually attribute goals to these geometric agents, and I think there are plenty of good evidence for that. And the general idea here is that there may be a generic way to evaluate action-goal matches, which is available for infants as well. And very briefly, the main idea behind this is coming probably from economics, that actions are expected to maximize the utility that the actor gains from the outcome of these actions, in a way that they want to maximize this utility. And they do this by either maximizing the rewards that they received or the cost of the action. So if there is a fixed reward, fixed end state of the goal, then the utility is maximized when the cost is minimized, which means that agents are expected to act efficiently. And so the idea here is that behind this, that infants can use this idea in order to see and to judge whether a certain outcome is the goal of the action as well. And there is good evidence for that in these very old studies, when they see these kind of events, and then we remove that black rectangle from the middle, then infants see that this last one, the straight approach, is more likely to happen than the previous one. And this kind of studies were replicated in many different forms, in many different kinds of agents, in environments and situations, and all of them suggest that infants use these kinds of efficiency evaluation in order to judge whether it's a goal-directed action and what the goal could be. So the question that we ask today is whether one can extend these naive utility calculus to social interactions. This seems plausible because an action can affect the utility of other agents by increasing or decreasing their cost of actions, or by providing or depriving rewards to or from them. And studies in behavioral economics suggest that adult humans consider such externalities in their evaluation of others' actions and in their decisions concerning whether they engage in social actions with these others and with whom they do so. So the question is whether human infants observe social interactions also in these kinds of terms, which actually recently suggested by other people as well. So let's start with the very simple social interactions, which is helping, which is simple just at the first sight, because it seems intuitive what helping is, but it turns out that helping is not at all a simple action. There is not a single way how someone acts that you would recognize as helping. Helping actually requires someone to analyze the underlying structure of the goals of the two agents. And it goes something like this. The goal of helping is to reduce the cost of the patient, that is the helpee's own goal-directed action, right? So it can be analyzed also in this framework, but it would imply that understanding helping actions properly requires the attribution of a second-order goal, because the goal of the helper includes the term of the goal of the helpee. So the question is whether infants can attribute such second-order goal. So you may think that this question is already answered, because there is this study by Hamlin in 2007, which I started this talk with. But I'm not sure that that's the case, and I'm not sure because we tried to replicate that study and completely failed to replicate it. despite the study was actually monitored and controlled by Kylie Hamlin herself. And earlier we tried to replicate a different version of this study, in which the conceptually is the same kind of events here, but it's not a high hill climbing, but a box opening kind of paradigm when one of the agents could help, the other could hinder the success of the agents. So these replications were completely unsuccessful, but recently it turns out that it were not just we were unsuccessful, but almost everyone. So this was a large study including 35 labs and more than 500 babies, where they tried to replicate the original study. And as you can see, it's going to work, yes. So there are two versions of the study where the agent is actually an agent with eyes, the other with eyes are not there, and the argument is that there should not be any effect here. So if the study worked properly, all the orange dots should be on the right side, and the green should be anywhere. But it turns out that the orange dots are also around everywhere. There were some labs that could actually replicate the effect. There were some labs that found exactly the opposite effect, and that includes Kylie Hamlin's own lab at the UBC that produced the opposite effect. So I think that there is no good evidence that this study would work. So there is no good evidence that infants understand helping actions at all. So we try to develop a study to check this in a way in which we would remove all kinds of other components of helping actions that usually there in real life, and just keeping the real structure of the goals and how the goals of two agents are related to each other. So it went something like this. We saw infant actions in which a yellow agent is approaching a strawberry. Sometimes it has to go around a long way, and other times this little block is removed by another agent, is the helper, and it creates a shorter pathway. And we show them many of these kinds of events, and so you can compare the two actions, whether so they could detect that the effect of the green agent is to reduce the cost of the goal-related actions of the yellow agent. And then it tested whether they made this inference about the goal-directed actions by offering these two events when the yellow agent again approaches the strawberry, and in one case the green agent actually makes this more efficient. The other case, it moves another block away, so it actually doesn't have an effect on the yellow agent's action. And what we are measuring here, and many of the following studies, is looking times. And looking time studies work like that infants are expected to look longer at events which are unexpected or incongruent with what they saw before, or unprimed, as opposed to primed or congruent and so on actions. And this is what we found. Practically, there is no difference here in looking time between the two kinds of actions. So it seems that infants did not see the difference between helping and not helping in this situation. And this is not because they did not interpret these events of the yellow agents as goal-directed actions, because after the same familiarization, we show them two actions. One of them is an efficient actions for the same as other inefficient actions. Then they actually show the expected looking time difference events, right? So it's and so I guess that they interpreted both agents' action as a goal-directed actions. They were just unable to relate them to each other. So does this mean that infants would not be able to use these efficiency evaluations in order to interpret social interactions? No, that's not the case. In another study, we showed that infants can actually evaluate joint goals, right? When two agents act together to achieve the same outcome, and could apply efficiency evaluations of the of their actions. So these are the kind of actions. They are transferring these objects from one side to the other. And we showed them in many different ways. So in at least these two different ways I just showed them, none of them, so this one is less efficient for action for the yellow agent, but more efficient for the red one, and the other way around in the other cases. But the aggregate cost of the two agents together is the same. So none of them is more efficient than the other. So both are fine in order to understand these goal-directed actions. And then we tested whether infants understood this way by showing them in two different events. In one of them, in both of them, a single wall was removed from the original study, and then it's either they would have practically the same actions as before. In both cases, they should have the same actions as before. But in one case, there would have been actually another action which would have made their aggregate cost of the two agents for achieve the same goal different. And what we found here is that they actually looked longer for the incoherent, so less efficient actions together, both in the individual efficiency condition, which I did not show here, and in the collective efficient conditions. So it suggests that infants evaluate joint actions in a naive utility calculus framework. However, this only requires them to posit a single goal, right? That they're acting together, rather than relating two separate goals to each other, which would be the case in helping. So, okay, so if infants around 1 year of age don't really understand this abstract ideas of helping, when do they do so? We don't know, but we have some ideas that by early preschool age, infants can do this. So we did an online study with 3 and 4 year olds in which we showed them very similar events that we showed infants. So this green agent is always going for an apple. Sometimes it's a short way, sometimes it's a longer way to go. And then when they are familiarized to them, we subject these children to two different kinds of tests. In one of them, we show these events, and they have to help this agent and ask them which block they want to remove in order to help the agent, right? And then we show them the effect. And the second block, we show them two different actions that further agents perform. And in both of them, there is one helping, the other is not helping. This one is the yellow is helping because this is the removing the block from here would make the path to the apple shorter. In the other case, one of them is removing a block which make an efficient action as possible, and the other is actually hindering action because it blocks an available pathway. And what we find here is that in the first block, children actually were practically chance at choosing which objects they remove, but in the second block, they tended to choose when they asked who helped the agent who actually helped. So this would suggest that identifying helping, understanding the word helping properly as an action that reduces the help's action cost is available for preschooler infants. But when they help, they do not select the action that would maximally reduce the help's action cost, which is, if you think about it, is not really surprising. Helping doesn't require someone to reduce maximally the action cost of the helpee. So as a little bit of summary here, we found no evidence that infants would interpret, understand helping as a second-order goal, but 3-year-olds do so. And it's also possible that infants apply this kind of evaluation of actions to simpler interactions, such as joint collaborative actions, which I showed already, and perhaps other situations like goal conflict situations and donations. So goal conflict situations may be interpreted in this framework as one agent preventing another one from harvesting the rewards of his actions. And the donation can increase the utility of the recipient without imposing any cost on him. So this is how we could interpret them in terms of efficiency framework. So the goal of conflict situation we did this way. We showed an agent who obviously liked this particular location in the world, and then comes another one and disagrees with him, pushing him out. So it's a conflict that who can occupy that kind of space, and one agent is winning. We show these kind of events in fact several times until they get bored of it, and then we show them different test events, and also there is a conflict, but a different type of conflict. In this case, there is some kind of resource that both agents like to take, and that's what they do here. Until there is a piece of resource that both of them intend to take, and then just one of them can take it. And then it's either the one who took it before or the other one. So the question is whether the idea that among these two agents, one of them wins a contest, whether they have expectations about a different type of context, whether the same agent should win as well. And the answer is yes. Again, the measure is looking time. So if A wins over B during familiarization, then they look longer when this turns around than when they see the same kind of outcome in a different situation. So looking at the other type of interactions that we studied a lot actually is this kind of giving versus taking actions. So infants observe these kinds of actions. Again, we label them as giving, but it's actually a very abstract way of giving. So it doesn't show all the kinds of actions that you would see normally between two people with giving. There is no handing over, there is no acknowledgement, and so on. They're always missing. It's very abstractly a giving actions because someone is delivering a resource from his possessions to the possession of another agent. And then we contrast this with another event which is very similar in the sense that, again, an agent is transporting an action, but in this case, from another agent to his possession, as long as you interpret proximity as possession here, which I guess it's true for infants. So these are the taking actions. And then we test whether infants discriminated between these two events and actually remember who performed what by showing them that an agent is traveling with an object, and the question is which side the other agent is, either on this side or on the other side. And we do this kind of contrasts. In this case, it's a taking action. You would expect the agents on the left side, but no, it's again the right side. So it turns out to be a giving action. And so when we measure looking times to these kind of events, then we find again that if the infants observe the same action from the same agent, they look less than when they see the opposite and when they exchange that. Now, this doesn't necessarily tell us whether infants actually interpreted these actions as interactions. Well, the green agent never did anything. There was no interaction here, so they didn't have to take into account what the presence of the green agents at all. So further studies that tested the idea whether they took into account the presence of the green agent here. So in one case, we actually compared proper giving actions with the different actions, which was disposing. So again, traveling with a resource and leaving that somewhere else, but it's not next to another agent, so it's not a giving action. And the same with taking actions, either taking an object from another agent or just from a resource, an unpossessed resource as well. And what we find here is that in taking actions, infants didn't discriminate between these two but in forgiving, they discriminated between these two, which suggests that for interpreting these kind of actions, they don't really need the other agents. They're just interpreting as collecting something. And it makes sense because that's the simplest explanation that explains why someone is performing an action just to collect a resource, that the reward is there. This kind of interpretation doesn't work for giving because or disposing, right? Because the agent actually performs a costly action, both energetic cost and also losing an object. And it's not quite clear what rewards they actually harvest for this kind of actions. So in this case, including the givee actually helps them to interpret them as a proper interaction, right? And so this suggests that in order to do that, infants have to be very sensitive to those kinds of events in which there is a potential giving action, there is a potential givee, right? So a donation. So this gave us the idea that let's see whether infants interpret even ambiguous actions as giving actions. So the study went like this. So this is a proper goal-directed actions that you see here. This blue agent approaches this pink object and meanwhile pushes away another object. And this action can be made ambiguous by the fact that if there's another agent also on the scene who actually obtained this pushed over objects, that could be interpreted as a potential giving action. So the idea here was that if infants are so sensitive to the structure of giving, then even if it could be eliminated as a potential goal of the action, they would take into account, right? And so they would not be sure that the only goal of this blue object was to approach that pink object. So again, this was a looking time study in which the test was that we little bit changed the scene, and these blue agents either went towards the same pink objects or turned around and went towards this potential donated objects in the scene. And so the question was, which actions infants would see is compatible with what they saw before. And again, we measured looking time in two different versions. One of them, there's a patient was downstairs, and the other one, there was a simple object was downstairs, and measured the looking time to the straight test when the blue agents went towards the pink one, or when it turned. And when there is no patient, they actually, as we expected, they thought that turning was unexpected. They expect the agents to go straight away. And so in the other case, we thought that this would turn around because this is an ambiguous event. So it could be either seen as a giving action or as an approaching action. But it turns out that it was not just equalized, the two kinds of looking, but they completely turned around. So it suggests that infants actually thought that this was actually an action of giving, so that the turning would be more compatible with what they saw before. This was so surprising that we replicated this result and just show you just the same, practically same study, and we found exactly the same kind of pattern of results. So again, a little bit of summary. Infants readily interpret the outcomes of goal for conflict situations and donations as social interactions that have positive or negative outcomes on others. Whether these are actually simply just based on just evaluation of efficiency and cost and rewards, it's not quite clear yet, but that's one possible interpretation of them. But it was proposed that when infants interpret these kinds of interactions, then they derive the interpretations of this from the traits of individuals. for example, one can derive, so the giver is an altruist, it donates things to others, and perhaps the one who is winning the contest as the bully, who always takes resources from others, and this would explain these kind of their inferences from the familiarization to the test. So what would happen there? The alternative is that they may interpret them as reflecting relations, certain type of social relations between the agents. Social relations in which giving is an action which is compatible with the relations, or in which winning over the other is compatible. So one could test this kind of inferences by see whether infants think that these actions should be generalized to different kinds of patients. If it is a giver, it should give to anyone, right? If it is a winner, it should win over anyone. So we tested these assumptions as well. As you remember, this was the giving actions where infants remembered who was the giver, and was surprised when it became a taker. But when we changed the patient, so there was not the green, the test didn't include the green agents, but a yellow one, I think, then this effect completely disappears. So they did not generalize the actions to other kinds of patients, which suggests that they did not just encode what the blue agents did, but they encoded what did he do to whom. Again, it's, first, there are further indications in our studies that these events are interpreted in terms of social relations rather than traits. It is another version of the giving versus taking study. It's different because there are three agents are present at the same time. There is a giving action and a taking action. And then, so the question is whether infants think that these actions could be reciprocated, whether they think that the reciprocating is compatible with the interpretation that they see. So this would be a congruent action where the dog gave to the chicken who previously gave to him something. Of course, infants did not see all the three events at the same time, just one at a time. I'm just showing you what the structure of the study was. So it was actually a very complex study with 8 different experiments, which I'm not going to explain all of them to you. I'm just giving you the summary of the results here. The summary is that infants accept reciprocation for both giving and taking, in this case tolerated taking actions, but they infer different kinds of structural relations behind them. In particular, for giving actions, they remember who gave to whom, while in taking actions, tolerating actions, they don't remember who was the taker within a pair. On the other hand, for taking actions, they accept that this could be transitive. So if A takes from B and then B takes from C, that the thing that A is taking from C is absolutely fine, right? And this is because they expect that these tolerated taking are in a group relations in which there are communal sharing relations between them. But for taking, but for giving, that's not the case. A gives to B and B gives to C. Then they don't think that it doesn't follow that A should give to C as well. So what these altogether this suggests that infants really interpret these actions as indicative of relations, and they embed these relations into a larger structures. They have ideas of what kind of larger structures could be in which these actions are embedded. And so turning to the other type of actions that we studied with Olivier, this is the conflict situation. So as you remember, when infants saw that A is winning over B, then they were surprised when in a different situation B was winning over A. And again, if now in the test we confront A with a different agent with C, then they have no idea who should win here. So it's not just that they think that A is a general winner who should always be general. So I think what's happening here that they interpret them as a relation, a dominance relation between A and B, which has no relevance to figure out what's the relation between A and C. And again, we have evidence that infants have intuitions about what kind of larger structure these kind of relations could be embedded to. So this is one way to study. We show infants 3 different dominance relations. A is dominant over B, B is dominant over C, C is dominant over D. Or show them again 3 different dominance relations. A is dominant over B, B is dominant over C, C is dominant over A, which of course is not a linear but a circular relation, which is not compatible with generally how dominance structures work. And then after they seeing that, we just show them again the relation between B and C and the question whether they still remember who is dominant among them. And it turns out that in the linear case, they still remember that B is dominant over C. In the other cases, circular relations, they don't remember. They forget it. They're completely confused by the fact that it became a circular structure. So again, what I suggest here is that it's not the case that infants are completely lost when they see these interactions. They actually derive quite rich inferences from these observations, but these inferences are not about the traits or the moral traits of these individuals, but more about the social relations among them. So what about then the question which was behind the original Hamlin study, right? That was they used this very specific measure of manual choice in order to show that infants are actually choosing a partner for themselves. When they ask who do you like, the question, I guess, what is behind it is that who do you want to affiliate with? Who do you want to be your partner in some kind of adventure in life? And so, but because the Hamlin study did not work, and if infants interpret these interactions in terms of social relations, which don't allow you to give you an idea that who do you want to work with. So if infants see, even if they understand the helping relation between 2 agents, and they see a helper and a helpee, or a hinderer and a hinderee, right? If they interpret them as in terms of social relations and not in terms of traits, they would not be able to use them in order to choose a partners, because that's actually not relevant for them. So then we started a different set of studies to see whether older children actually use these kinds of observations in order to choose partners. So for that, there were some studies actually on whether preschoolers can choose partners on the basis of information that they are provided about agents, but those were either the studies were done either the way that you were told that Johnny is nice, Willie is not nice, who do you want to play with, right? So it was not the case that the infants, well, the children would have to derive these attributions from their own observations. Yeah. So the only kind of partner choice studies, these behaviors or the traits were directly communicated to children. Their choice, who do you want to play with, who do you like, was actually prompted by an experimenter, and their choice was completely hypothetical because there was no actually collaboration. So it didn't actually matter who they chose. And they usually actually, in response to these questions, they choose the one who was described as a good character, right, for them. So as opposed to that, we wanted to see whether they infer these collaboration-relevant traits from their observation themselves. And they use these inferences to choose partners in a context in which it mattered who they choose, actually. It mattered to their success. So for this, we developed a game on an iPad. This is how it went. Okay, so what happens here is that there are agents on the scene, and there are nuts falling from the street when they can open up, and that it contains berries which the agents can receive. Some of these berries contain just one kind of berry for one of them. Some of them contains two kinds of berries, so then they can collaborate them, and so on. And so these in the game, we can actually specify behavioral characteristics of these agents. Some of them could be faster, much more efficient on cracking the nut, so more skilled. The other could be more prosocial in the sense that helping more to the other to crack the other agent's nuts. But the infants are not told this. The children are not told these kind of things. Yeah. And then in the very first study, which was online and during COVID, children actually didn't play the game, they just observed these kinds of events that I showed you, interactions. And after each interaction, we asked them questions about the characters. They did not know in advance what questions they would get, and they would get different questions after each of the trials. So they didn't know what to pay attention to. But we're interested whether they extracted relevant information in them. So we asked, for example, who was faster. We asked them who helped more, the other. We asked them who collected more berries, right? After they observed these kind of events. And we just measured whether they were correct or not. This is a two-choice task, and we didn't give them any feedback. It turns out that the children are very good at this, right? So even if they did not know what kind of questions you asked them, they see these events, and they could tell who was faster, who helped more to the others. And that's also the case when in the contrast case where the one helper was actually, one agent was fast but not unhelpful, the other was slow but helpful. In these cases, well, again, they were very correct to this. And they could also tell who collected more berries, who had more success. We did this study both in Hungary and Japan. There was not much difference between them, except that Japanese children are more sensitive to success than Hungarian ones. So then we went on to play the game after COVID, when the children themselves could actually play the game as well. And it goes like that they can control one of the characters themselves, which actually their own avatar, and they could play against whoever they choose as a partner. So in the most important study here, there were a series of studies here. What we found is that after some kind of training, right, when we actually show them, it turns out that we had to show them that these characters are consistent. So when they play with others and we play with them, they behave the same way, right? So that if they get this experience with 4 different trials, then they develop some idea of how to choose partners. And as you can see, infants in both skill trials and prosocial trials, so both when the agents were different in skills and both when the difference in prosociality, they choose the one who was better partner. So they choose the faster couples and the more helpful couples. But they only did so from about 7 years of age. 5-year-olds were completely at chance, and even 6-year-olds in many times. So as you see, in Hungary, children from about 7, they start to use the skill as a property to choose partners, and about 8 to choose the more helpful agent. In Japan, everything is a year younger. They develop somehow faster, so that at 6 years of age, they choose the faster one. At about 7, they choose the more helpful one. So if with some training, children can learn this, but even that's not before about 7 years of age that they could use these kinds of traits to actually choose partners. And this is despite the fact that, as you saw them in the previous study, even 5-year-olds can tell who is faster, who helps more. It's just they don't take them into account when they choose partners. And there was a further study when we skipped the training to see whether they can do it. Only did it with older children because the younger children anyway did not succeed. And then you see that then above 7 children actually choose. This was in Vienna, but it doesn't really matter. They chose the faster partners, but not in prosocial attires. And when we contrast these two things together, so again, can choose a slow helper or a fast non-helper, they go for skill. So in sum, what these studies show is that while children from about 5 years of age can recognize collaboration relevant behaviors, they don't spontaneously interpret them as reflecting stable traits. But from about 7 years of age, they can do that. Especially with skill, and they adopt them in order to choose partners. So, in sum, what I try to show you that infants interpret some social interactions via the extended version of a naive utility calculus, that is, they interpreting the costs and benefits that agents receive from an interaction. But helping, we did not find evidence for that below 3 years of age. Well, we don't know actually when, but at 1 year of age, this inference was not there for helping. I showed you also that infants conceive social interactions indicative of the underlying social relations rather than of individual traits, as it is shown by the fact that they don't generalize these kinds of actions, and they infer structural relations among more than 2 agents behind that, and that children don't rely on trait attribution for choosing partners for cooperation until middle childhood, and even then, this may not emerge spontaneously. Thank you for your attention.